About 100 miles west of London, and not far from the historic city of Bath, lies the little town of Bradford-on-Avon. Situated in the county of Wiltshire, it's close to the border with Somerset and on the southernmost edge of the Cotswold Hills. Bradford means broad ford, the name dating back more than 1300 years to Saxon times. That was more than 500 years before the first bridge was built across the Wiltshire Avon. It wasn't until the 13th century that a narrow pack-horse bridge was erected, part of which is incorporated into the present town bridge. The Saxons built Bradford's most famous building, the tiny church of St. Lawrence, rediscovered in the mid-1800s. Because it had been converted to secular use and hemmed in by other buildings, its existence as a chapel had been completely forgotten. For more than 600 years, wool was the staple industry of Bradford. Some former wool mills still stand on the banks of the Avon, which provided water power to drive the machinery. The town also had a quarrying and masonry industry. The local area provided durable Bath stone for walls, and a more easily split stone for roofing slates. However, by the 1840s, the traditional industries were in deep decline, and Bradford-on-Avon was far from prosperous. It was then that a newcomer arrived in Bradford, a man born in Devon of seafaring stock, who had become a broker, and who for some years had been working in New York. His name was Stephen Moulton. While working in the USA, Moulton had met Charles Goodyear, who had discovered how to convert natural rubber into a strong yet elastic material by heating it at high temperature with sulfur. Goodyear called this process vulcanization, and Stephen Moulton was quick to appreciate the possibilities. He obtained the British rights to Goodyear's process and returned to England, where he tried to interest the government in the potential of vulcanized rubber. But Whitehall was not interested, so Moulton decided to manufacture rubber himself. At the suggestion of one of his financial backers, Stephen Moulton moved to Bradford-on-Avon, where in 1846 he acquired the relatively new but disused Kingston cloth mill. 2 years later he started rubber production and was soon supplying products ranging from rubber buffer springs for the railways to false teeth. The mills, now sadly derelict, remained in use for more than 120 years, until, in the early 1970s, production moved a few miles away to more modern premises. Having established his factory, Stephen Moulton bought a dilapidated mansion adjoining his mill and renamed it the Hall. Built at the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, the Hall had once been the finest house in Bradford-on-Avon. But when Moulton bought it, it was semi-derelict, having been used for years as a wool store. He began the work of restoration and maintenance that his descendants have continued to the present day. Stephen Moulton's great-grandson, Dr. Alex Moulton, is the present owner. Born in 1920 and one of Britain's greatest living engineers, he has devoted his life to engineering innovation. Best known for his small-wheeled bicycles and interlinked automotive suspension systems, he has also been deeply involved in aeronautical engineering and spent many years working on improvements to steam power. Alex Moulton became a Royal Designer for Industry in 1968, and 8 years later was made a Commander of the Order of the British Empire. In 1980 he was elected to the Fellowship of Engineering, and he has many other qualifications and honours. In autumn 1998, cycling historian John Pinkerton interviewed Alex Moulton at the Hall. John started by asking Alex about his childhood at the Hall, with a railway and river at the bottom of the garden, and the rubber factory just across the river.
I was brought up here. It was my grandmother, and I was in the chatelaine of the house at that time. My mother was a widow, so it was really the leading person in the house was my grandmother. My grandfather had just died. My father had also died. So I was brought up here with this very Victorian lady, my grandmother, as the chatelaine, and it was very much the residue, if you like, of a Victorian ethos or culture. She had lost her beloved younger son, my uncle, in the First War, which wasn't all that long before ago, and then had lost my father, who died early. So it was that was the background of it, and I, as the youngest grandson, or grandchild, spent my childhood here, and I was enormously happy and felt I very much belonged here. And it was, you must realize that it was the circumstances were fairly, certainly not at all luxurious. I mean, the place was obviously rather lovely and luxurious, but it was, the times in between the wars were very tight for money, and we were, the factory to which you referred was the rubber factory, Spencer Moulton, was going through a difficult post-war, interwar period. So it was not a luxurious life, but very disciplined, and I was certainly, as I said, very happy here. I loved the place, and that nostalgia must have been implanted, as it were, in me, which has carried me right through my life. And the influences were certainly the railway, the Great Western Railway, which went literally through the bottom of the garden, and maybe during our talk we may hear now a diesel train go through, because it's quite that near. And the other thing, of course, is the works to which you referred, which were rubber works, which had a very nice steam engine in it, or steam plant, Bellis and Morecambe, a well-known Birmingham name of generating set. And we, my brother and myself, were often shown over the works, and we were very well, Master Alex, come and have a look at this, and Master John and that. And the other influence, which was very much, was the estate carpenter. His name was Cooper, a wonderful man of some age, who interested me very much by showing me the use of tools. They're woodworking tools, but the making of things, I'm sure I was influenced by him, this lovely man, Cooper. I was also influenced, of course, by the steam, and knowing, I think, right from as a child, I couldn't interpret it in this way, that I wanted to be an engineer. I was fascinated by things being made, by things, how they worked. And I think one of the very basic things about somebody who's interested in engineering is to improve it.
Yes.
It is a natural desire to, whatever they come across and are interested in, the thrust, the homo faber man, the maker, is to improve it.
That's right. Yes.
So the steam engine was certainly one item, and then obviously the bicycle, because that was the first mobility the children had.
When did you get your first bicycle? Can you remember that?
I was certain there must have been a kid's bicycle that I remember riding about in the garden. Certainly a tricycle, a kid's tricycle. Very young. I mean, I would have thought 4 or 5 a tricycle would be that sort of age.
Yes.
And I remember, apropos of that, I remember going to the estate carpenter Cooper and said, look, I want to help me make an aeroplane. And so he, a pretty ambitious thing to do, and he made, I remember very clearly, 2 bits of wood like that.
Yes.
One was meant to be the wing and one was meant to be the fuselage. And I hopped about on this thing, imagining I was flying an aeroplane, and not obviously taking off, but actually going about. And I remember my enormous disappointment. I was very, very young then, when Bailey, he was the rose gardener, said to me, Master Alec, an aeroplane isn't made of like that. It's made with canvas and wood, because obviously they were thinking of the First War. Soppy things were made of that fabric. And so that was a great blow to me, that I was being introduced to something which wasn't right. But coming back to bicycles then, so certainly a kiddie's bike. And then very clearly my other grandparents were Stratford-on-Avon, because I was actually born in Stratford-on-Avon. My mother was
you were born
at Stratford-on-Avon, isn't it? My childhood was spent here, but I was actually born, that's my mother's home, in Stratford-on-Avon, rather place, Stratford-on-Avon. And it's very funny that, coming forward to present-day times, Pashleys are in Stratford-on-Avon.
That's right.
Isn't that a funny thing?
So you've sort of gone back there with
by
the
chance.
association.
So we used to alternate, us grandchildren, used to alternate our holidays, primarily here at Bradford, where we are now, but also Stratford-on-Avon. And it was at Stratford-on-Avon that I have very clear memory of being given, I think it was a Hercules. I think it was certainly at pre-prep school age. I went to a prep school in those days at Arden House, Henley and Arden, which is nearby. At the age, I expect we went to the age of 9, about then. I can remember one thing at my grandparents' house in Stratford. He was a lovely family doctor, my grandfather, and he was a mayor for 2 years before my time, and then he was head of the hospital and so on. He was a lovely man, a lovely family doctor. Mm-hmm. And he used to arrange that when I came back from the prep school, Headley and Arden House, there was a lovely black piggy, which was a toy or a pet, if you like, a stuffed one, I must say, not a live, was always peering round the door for me to welcome me back.
Welcome you there.
So that was really a mark, if you like, one's homesickness, of the longing to come home. And may even be that I've just taken up now in my old age to have a cat, a proper live one, you know, and that does bring me back. we certainly had a lovely cat called Evelyn there, so that's a little bit of a sentimental thing, but that's there. But coming back to the bicycle, it was, I think, a junior Hercules. And I think it would have been in the category of the well-known category £3 1906. And it was bought in the High Street, and I remember going seeing, of course, enormous rod brake things, and the enormous delight of going with my sister Dione. Bicycle rides were allowed, very, very definite little routes in the countryside around. And so certainly that was my first real bicycle, and the emancipation of that of movement, mobility, the first time.
I think a lot of people would agree that the bicycle is the freedom machine.
The freedom machine, absolutely. I've spoken about my delight in the bicycle and cycling, and I did, by the way, it comes back to me across the years, make the long ride. I suppose I would have been 13. 12 or 13. The long ride on that, it might have been a full-size Hercules then, but it was certainly a very basic bicycle from Stratford to Bradford. And that was, I did it alone, and it was a 75-mile ride, and it was a good ride. And the impression of that is very deeply into my mind, that I was alone, and one grandparent set me off, as it were. The grandmother, and the chauffeur, and so on was here. And I'm sure that if I hadn't arrived, there would have been vehicles coming up. But it was absolutely on my own, and the magic of not the local mobility to which we referred around with my sister around Stratford, but this long, venturesome journey, which, it struck me that, and I was certainly absolutely came in love with the concept of the Cyclist Touring Club and the long distance thing, and I became a very early member. I think I was a sort of a member at the age of 13 of the CTC, and always was looking at those lovely signs of the CTC signs. So the romance of the long distance ability of the bicycle moved me very much.
John next asked Alex how he became interested in steam power. Apparently, it all started at prep school.
There was an amazing thing. There was a boy there, his name I think was Smith, and his parents owned a fleet of Sentinel steam lorries and their steam wagons, and I used to be romanticized about these things, or study all the catalogues and see them and so on. So there was an early imprint that in one's life was a steam, and I wasted a great in later life in retrospect, though very interesting, a great deal of time and energy on developing an improved and more efficient steam engine. And that was, I can trace that now by that early interest of the locomotives here. Yes. And this kid that had his father had these fleet of steam wagons. My father, who died, and my uncle who was killed, were both at the end of the last century at Eton. And therefore it was very much a tradition that boys go to their father's school, but it was significant that we were at that time in financial pressures. And it was the thing that I've always very much respect, that the money was really that the family lived on were dividends from the factory.
Yes.
The factory is just a yard away, as it were, just over the fence, a few yards away. And there was a difficult period in the the slump of the 1920s, 1929. And therefore we were hard up as a family, and very properly my grandparents and my grandmother and mother decided that us boys, that's my brother and myself, should go to public school. Certainly that was the normal thing, but a less expensive one. And I was sent to Marlborough, which was actually, in those pre-war days, very rigorous and very, very good, excellent. So I'm enormously grateful for that education, which is much the best that I could possibly have had. But after Marlborough, carrying on this thing of steam, I had resolved to go to the Sentinel Wagon Works, to which you refer, as a pupil apprentice. Now, a pupil apprentice in those days, the parent paid money for the boy to be trained, and it was an extremely good thing. And this factory was a lovely factory in Shrewsbury, 800 people, that sort of size, doing the steam wagons to which you've referred, and small enough to have all the functions of manufacture comprehensible. You could see the pattern shop and the machine shop and so on. And the particularly interesting thing that they were doing at that time, that Abner Doble, who was the Doble steam car, was American, and was acting as a consultant there, and a very interesting high-tech improved steam lorry was being developed there, and I'm of course fascinated to be in on that, as it were. And I should just interpose that during my school time at Marlborough, I was actually making here and taking bits back a steam car, and it was a GN chassis with a steam engine in it, and I actually ran it around as a boy the grounds here. And I've heard tell that it exists still, which is very exciting. So, I mean, I sold it before the war, got rid of it. But that would be nice if I could get hold of my original first thing that I made, which was a steam car, a GN chassis, a chain drive, and put it in my museum. So that was, if you like, a little bit of the steam history, but it ended up very much in a valuable pupillage at the Central Works in Shrewsbury before I went to Cambridge and did my mechanical sciences.
I think it's been said, and you'll probably correct me if it's wrong, that if the effort that has been put into carburation and ignition into the internal combustion engine, if that effort had have been put into steam production and then the condensation of steam in the steam engine would have now been running around in steam vehicles. Do you think that's true?
It's a fascinating hypothesis which I have heard, and I had up to a few years ago I would have accepted. But what in fact has happened is that the fundamental efficiency of the internal combustion engine, that's actually the efficiency of the fuel in to energy out, is fundamentally very high. And that's why the thing has survived. And the steam engine is fundamentally inefficient. And one has to do all sorts of very complicated things to attain less efficient results. So what you say could have been true if it hadn't been for the fundamental of the lower efficiency of the steam cycle in comparison with the internal combustion engine one. So, and also a point that you should mention is that the automatic transmission, which is very much an American invention or development of General Motors, was enormously significant because that provided the internal combustion engine with this quiet start and the acceleration and so on.
As soon as he was old enough to get a licence, Alex Moulton took up motorcycling. His first machine was a Scott TT replica, and, knowing how idiosyncratic Scots were, John asked if it was a good one.
And I remember talking of that on the motorcycle, that first year at Cambridge, we're talking before the war, that I had it back at Cambridge. I don't know whether we were allowed or not, but I certainly had it back. And we did the tuning of it in the long corridor of the engineering lab without exhaust system. And my goodness me, we obviously did it after hours, but I can remember this day, the noise of Scott without silencer being set for the amyl carburetors running down the corridor.
Was that your only machine, or did you have...
No, I've had a whole lot of them, but there's one, let me just describe one little incident which has come back to me of that Scott motorcycle, which is relevant, that I was going to Moulton in Yorkshire, and on the Scott, and it must have been the winter of 1938, and it was in the winter, and I was sitting out from here, Bradford-on-Avon, and at those times that of course the one's kit, there were leathers then, the helmet like that, you remember? Yeah. And the Brooklyn's helmet. And it was winter, and I put newspapers round oneself to try and keep warm, and not realising that this was a hell of a ride from Bradford-on-Avon to Moulton, Yorkshire, in winter.
Yes.
And it began to snow, and when one got north, and I was falling off rather often. I'm actually going slowly, but I knew that I couldn't make it because the snow was getting worse, and I was picked up. I didn't hurt myself at all. It was just because it was just a laying down rather than I was going very slowly at the end with my feet probably on the ground, and I was picked up by a nice guy with a lorry, a truck. And I said where I was going. He said, "Well, I live near there. Let's lift your bike on the the wagon, and I'll take you to somewhere who was a farm that couldn't possibly put you up." And thank you very much. And I remember I had this funny helmet and this kit on, and I think it actually wasn't leathers. It was actually a black suit, I think. And I had a pack on the back, and I knocked on the door, and they thought I was a parachutist. And they absolutely said they were very scared. They thought I was a German parachutist.
So, turning to things aeronautical, how did Alex get into aeronautical engineering?
On came the war. We're talking late of 38, now 1939. And the outbreak of war, everybody of our age immediately volunteered. And I did, living here in Bradford, was told to go down to Bristol, because I was an undergraduate, to go down to Bristol to the recruiting place there. Or rather, I had to go to Bristol was the main recruiting thing, and they told me, as I was undergraduate, to go to Cambridge, which I did. So I went to Cambridge, to the recruiting board there, which they'd set up at the university. And it was in the Senate House. And there were great long lines of people there, and they're taking your particular and so on. And the particular man that I saw was, must have been a Don, Wing Commander Hen. And he'd said, I said, look, I want to go to the Air Force. And he said, have you had any flying experience? I said, no, not at all. He said, what about dinghy sailing? And I said, I don't know about dinghy sailing, I paddle a canoe, but I want to go in the Air Force. And he said, oh no, we think, you see, that if you are a dinghy sailor, you'll be familiar with the feel of the air in the sails, you see. So at the end of that conversation, so I was put down, he said, well, you're doing engineering, partway through your engineering. Of course, we'll put you down for the engineering branch of the Air Force. And so I was put down for that. Well, at that time, we're talking of September 39, and there was no opening because everything was overloaded, of course, with the volunteering until April. So April 40, that was the date that they thought that I had been needed. And so I came back here to Bradford and said to myself, look, I mean, no way am I going to hang about with this war on till April next year. I must find out about aero engines, because it was an engineer officer, primarily aero engine. And a friend of mine, Michael Robinson, a Marlborough friend of mine, Michael Robinson, his godfather was Roy Fedden, who was the great engineer at Bristol Engines, who I had met with him, so he just vaguely knew that I existed as a friend of his godson. So I went down in fear and trepidation to Bristol, to Moulton, and asked if I could possibly see him, and I was allowed to do so. And I simply said, Mr. Fedden, I've got 3 or 4 months before I've called up for the engineering branch of the Air Force. Could I get experience? I would love to be tremendously interested to get work here in your thing to get experience. And so he pressed a button, and we said to an assistant, show Moulton round, and so show him this and that, and bring him back when he's finished. So I came back and I said how enormously interested I was in everything I saw. And he said, which department interests you most? And I said, well, I was fascinated with the single cylinder testing, where they had cells. Remember, the Bristol engines were radial engines. They had
yes.
single cylinders cells. And I said, I'm enormously interested in that. So he said, right, we'll start work. £5, it was £4 a week, that sort of thing. And I said, a little,
very good, really.
Or it might have been less than that. It might be £3.10. But I mean, you know, just immediately start work. So I went in. I had digs, PGing with the parents of my friend Michael Robinson, the godson of Fedden, and I used to go in. Yes, now that's the next motor bicycle one. I used to commute in a Norton, the single-cylinder Norton, is it H? It was the
16H?
16H.
Side valve?
No, it wasn't that. I will, look, it was overhead valve,
yeah.
quite...
Model 18.
Model 18.
I think so,
That
yeah.
would be with a push rod, overhead push rod,
that's right.
rather a low-spec one,
Yeah.
500, I'm sure it was.
Big
500.
long stroke.
That's right, exactly. That's it. And so I used to commute from Westbury-on-Trim to Moulton every day, and I had a most enormously interesting time there. And then working in the shop, in the test shop, as a fitter. And that gave me, I remember I had the interest in, and to some extent slight skills, modest skills from the Sentinel, my period at Sentinel, in fitting and making them things. And I loved all that actual practical work, and then the quality of the aero engines, of course, was fantastically marvellous. And so I was very, very happy there, and made it some little bit of a contribution. I remember there's one thing that, a tiny thing, that I was working in the rig shop, which is where the superchargers are, the carburetors are, and so on, as opposed to single cylinder in the research department. And we had a problem on the Mercury engine fitted in the Blenheims. There's a whole batch of Blenheims being sent to Finland, because remember we were supporting Finland. They're white painted ones for Finland. And there's a problem of cold start. Mm-hmm. And we were all preoccupied with getting a cold start of this engine, and I suggested and made and used a little probe with a little swirl jet into the outer casing of the supercharger, which broke the fuel up to help the start. And that little device I had used in my steam car. In other words, it's something that I developed before. Yes. for the burner of the steam car, and used it in this thing, and it helped. And they obviously, the people I was working, my immediate bosses, Harvey Man, said, this guy seems to be rather helpful. So we'll reserve him. So in those days, for front companies like Aero Engine, people had obviously reserved occupations. So I was put on reserved, which is all the time being reflected, as it were, whether the person was any use. So I was reserved, and so the April passed, where the date which they might have called me up for the engineering.
Do you feel any regret about that?
Yes.
You didn't actually go.
Very much so. Regret, absolutely, very much so throughout my life, and particularly as all my friends were serving, many being killed all the time. That has been a great regret. On the other hand, there's a little offset of this thing that. In September, we had a very bad daylight raid, and we were in the shelters nearby, near the works, and peeping out of the shelters to see there was a whole, about 80 of the Heinkel 111s with a fighter escort coming up from the channel. and it's sort of about fairly low, very accurate daylight raid, and a terrible destruction. And we were very fortunate in our particular. The shelters were oval section concrete things, which were half on the ground, and a nearby one, and then more other ones had direct hits. So it was a terrible carnage. About several hundred people were killed. 200 people were killed, I think. And the consequence of that, 2 days later, Roy Fedden, the chief engineer, summoned me, hadn't obviously seen him in the intervening time, said, Agent Squire of Squire Cars, a young man of, I suppose he would have been about 30, was a project engineer on the big Centaurus engine, which the big 18-cylinder engine, had been killed in that raid. And he said, you will take his place and know everything. You'll act for me, Roy Fedden, and be my eyes and ears and message carrier, know everything about this engine. So I had out of that tragedy, if you like, of a real war, that by good fortune I wasn't in the shelter that was hit, as it were. But so that was that. So I had a very interesting war.
You probably didn't realise at the time that the contribution that you were able to make together with Bristol Aircraft towards the war effort was far greater than what you may have been able to do working in some workshop as a fitter.
Absolutely so.
Somewhere over in the war zone or something like that.
Indeed, I didn't realise that.
Was there any animosity from the population that were left behind?
No, it's very interesting.
A young chap like you?
Yes, very interesting. No, I didn't. I didn't feel that, sense that at all. Or rather, I was sensitive of it, as I've said to you, in a guilt mode, but in no way was that. So, you see, there were quite, look, obviously I was very young, but there were other young ones doing in the shop and so on. And the engineers in Bristol went old. I mean, they were
it was
certainly
a new industry.
Absolutely, and so they were all older than I, perhaps, but all modestly young. So there wasn't no. You see, there
were no white feathers.
Not at all. Exactly. That was very much, obviously, I believe, in the First War, but that was not because. No, I think that. Let me make this point: that then, when the raiding came into Bristol, the night raiding, nothing to do with the factory. The factory was a perfectly legitimate daylight target. Yes. Then at the end of the Battle of Britain, and we had, incidentally, the Battle of Britain was wonderful to see the fighter defence coming in. A squadron of Hurricanes came in and was at Filton Aerodrome, and they came in entirely by to defend us, entirely by air. They even brought the little Dove aircraft, brought the supervising person. They didn't come by road. They entirely the complete air movement of the squadron and the support. And then they tried again a raid 2 or 3 days later, and to see, looking out of our shelters, to see the enemy being just absolutely dispersed like that it was a moving thing. And so therefore we were associated at Bristol in being the people get on and make retribution. We were providing the engines which were were giving retribution to not to the daylight raid but the night raids which came very soon. And so we were regarded as get on and do it, get on and I feel that very much that the bombing was the only thing we could do, and our engines were very important in that.
After the war, Alex Moulton had the opportunity to stay with Bristol Aero Engines. Instead, he decided to return to the family firm, Spencer Moulton.
I had felt that I should contribute something to the future of that industry, that manufacturer, and which was primarily concerned with rubber applications to railways, which was the 19th century thing, in which we were very successful. And I felt, even at that time, that the automobile should be which is burgeoning, of course, post-war, should be a target for the application of rubber suspension things.
And was it your grandfather that was the Moulton industry?
No, great-grandfather. Great-grandfather. My grandfather was the chairman of it, and my uncle, who was killed in the Somme, was in it. So there were 3 generations, and a few other uncles and so on. And so it was owned the factory, but not the firm. It was a public company, two families, Moulton and Spencer. Spencer were the consulting engineers in London. And so it was a public company which had typically, very important point this, that when family members are killed off in a war, as the Spencers were and the Moultons were, then the remaining member, which in my case, my grandfather was a chairman, they weren't all that interested. And so the thing had gone, he died. So the company was a bit run down and not very strongly directed. So I, as it were, knocked on the door as a young man and said, look, could I possibly come here? And the Spencer people who were there said, yes, come on. So I went in as a young man, and first of all, learned everything about it. I became assistant to the works manager, a lovely man at Crystal, and a marvellous chemist whose name was Sam Pickles. Can you imagine a nice name? Dr. Sam Pickles. He was a lovely North Manchester University man, a very, very distinguished rubber chemist, absolutely of international standard, who by chance liked this little firm, and he could have taken any job. And he liked this little firm, and so I was very much taken in hand by him, Sam Pickles, and by the works manager, and was really guided along. And I soon realized that I must learn all about the fundamentals of rubber-to-metal bonding and all the whole rubber technology. And I was allowed to set up, influenced the directors, the research department in 1946 or 7, I think it was. And there I studied these fundamentals. And at the same time, I was being persuaded by these two wise men, Pickles and Crystal, that, Alex, you ought to go back to Cambridge and finish your degree. So I went back as a very much mature student at the age of 27, in 1947, and enormously enjoyed that return, because as a mature student, I knew what I wanted to learn. I mean, I sensed my ignorance and applied myself to it, and that was a wonderful 18-month period, that 4-term period that I did that.
Did you feel a little bit sort of out of it? 10 years, almost 10 years older than most of the students?
You know that there was a whole flood of those post-war people came back, a whole flood of them who had served in the forces. So one had plenty of contemporaries. Now, it was a wonderful period, because the thing that hadn't changed was the university. The continuity of the whole place and a lot of the staff were the same. So the continuity of the institution
was still there.
It was still absolutely there, and a whole new one's contemporaries had the wartime experience. And there were youngsters, but I suppose we did. Yes, there were a whole lot of youngsters, and it was nice to be with one's older age and youngsters at the same time. So it was a highly worthwhile period. So then I came back to the factory and set about pioneering these new things, rubber suspension things, and I had a whole raft of new things that I'd developed. The Flexitor and the cone springs and various other hydroelastic things, all were born, if you like, in that fundamental study of fundamentals with a tiny team. Some of them have even who carried on in my life, because they're Bradford people. And so it was a natural continuity of a technology in which making things was fundamental.
Wasn't there a special little motor car that you were involved with?
Yes, how clever of you to remember. There's a thing called a dragonfly. Now, that was very clever of you to have found that information. It was a friend of mine, a contemporary of mine at Bristol Engines, Ian Duncan. He had, as old as I, he had conceived this tiny vehicle using a Triumph speed twin engine. It was 4 wheels, and I put rubber suspension on it, and it interested Len Lord, who then later became Lord Lambury, and it was a forerunner of, but in no way to be connected or associated with it. It was a forerunner of the thought of a small car, if you like, which then enormously manifested itself 10 years later. That interested Len Lord, later Lord Lambury, of whom you know is a Birmingham connection, and it was looked at for a certain time, then it was scrapped, and that was that. But the important thing, let's come forward from that period, that was 1947, 1946, that period, come forward to the very much more important period of the mid-1950s, when I had got to know Isigonis, the famous Alec Isigonis, and I was introduced by David Fry of the Fry chocolate people, and he was a great racer with Chelsea Walsh and the Speed Hill Climb and so on. And Isigonis, of course, had this lovely thing called the Lightweight Special, which was a beautifully made thing. And a very important point on the Lightweight Special, which Isigonis had made, that it had a rubber band as a springing means. And it's often wrongly associated that from that origin, Isigonis, was interested in rubber springs. He wasn't at all. He thought they were very bad things and in no way to be used in a serious car. Perfectly all right for his little Lightweight Special. So that is a piece of non-wisdom or non-correct myth, if you like. Exactly.
Did you ever come across a chap by the name of Bob Collier, who worked for the Moulton Motor Company and produced a rubber suspension for a motorcycle?
No, Greaves, of course, I knew. Greaves.
No, this is Bob Collier.
No, I didn't. No.
But he did produce a motorcycle with rubber suspension on the back in partial conjunction with Dunlop.
Oh, did he? Would it have been the Macbeth system, possibly? And what?
No, I think it was the Collier system.
Was it?
Yes.
The answer is no. I don't know. But talking of motorcycles, just by the way, I did fit up a Vincent HRD, a Comet, with a rubber torsion, elastic suspension on the rear, in about I've got pictures of it about 1950 something. So I have done a motorcycle, and also a Royal Enfield, because Enfields were, during the war, they were down here, you know, in Bradford or in Westbury.
Their shadow factory.
Yes, exactly. And after the war, they continued in an old mill building here, the motorcycle manufacturer, for some time. And so it was easy for me to get to know. I think Young was the name of the managing director. And we certainly made quite a nice Enfield, small Enfield, with rubber suspension on the back. But let me just finish off, if I may, just to close in to the motorcar suspension. So it was my getting to know Isigonis, that wonderful, great genius of motorcar engineers. We became great friends. And he had no opinion of rubber suspension at all. He'd made a success of his Morris Minor with torsion bars and no reason to be interested at all. I, therefore, did a very important work with Jack Daniels at Cowley, who was in charge of the research department, and we fitted up a Morris Minor entirely with rubber suspension, took the torsion bars off, and I've got the fragments of it still, and we did a test at Mara, the Pave, which you know, and it was 1,000 miles straight through without any failure at all, and it was the fact of that, whereas the motor cars in those days did 500 miles and broke down, that impressed everybody. So this was a demonstration of, if you do it properly, that rubber suspension is a sound thing, and that impressed Isigonis. And then Isigonis, by that time, before he was picked up and went back to British Motor Corporation, we worked together on the Elvis car at Coventry, and the car itself wasn't successful, but we invented between us, if you like, the concept of a fluid interconnection, which is the hydroelastic. And when Isigonis was brought back by Len Lord to be chief engineer at BMC, Isigonis wanted my devices for introduction into his cars. That was the start of that, very fortunate for me, long association with Dunlop, who had to be the manufacturers, because Avon was too small, and the British Motor Corporation to incorporate my suspension on the Isigonis design cars. That was, in my little life, of enormous significance. So that just gets you to that point.
I remember that sort of period fairly clearly, because coincidentally, I worked in the catering department of the exhibition hall up at Longbridge.
Oh, with that big round.
That's right,
Really,
yes.
how splendid.
And of course we used to
Yes.
produce the meals that went
Yes.
across to what was called the Kremlin.
Okay, that's it, indeed.
They used to call it the Kremlin.
That's right, absolutely. Well, no, I absolutely remember that. And so you would have...
I remember all those funny little cars that
that's-
used to come along,
yes.
like what was the one from Wolverhampton, the Whisk or the Wisp or the Fisk or
yes,
something
could be,
like
yes,
that.
could be,
And
yeah.
probably saw
Yeah.
that dragonfly
Could
as
have,
well,
might have
without
done.
knowing it. I was
Could,
still
yes.
motorcycling
Yes.
then. So
That was very much, hold on to that period of memory, because that was the very, if you're talking about therefore the late 50s, beginning of 60s,
yes,
aren't you?
58, 59.
That's it. That
yeah.
was a tremendously dynamic, wonderful period of the British car industry, with this very dynamic leadership of Len Lord and Harriman, very much Longbridge, very much the Midlands, very much Dunlop, all that wonderful industrial centre, really doing something dynamic of world significance. And we felt that we didn't feel gung-ho, really, we just felt it was our natural thing to do.
That's right.
You know, and that's why it's so sad now when you see, or slightly cynically amusing, when you see BMW and Volkswagen fighting with one another over Rolls-Royce on the one hand and Rover on the other. I mean, it's a rather sad thing, isn't it? We then, at exactly your period that you referred to, were really dynamic and potentially world dominant.
Do you see in the current situation any real future for Britain? Because we seem to have lost all of this, and now talking almost of closing down Rover.
Yes.
We almost have to import and manufacture from elsewhere, and we were sort of the world leaders.
I feel, and I'm obviously of the age of having had that direct experience, and therefore the contrast is tremendous. And I feel, therefore, that it is enormously sad that what we have done, and it can be clearly stated in my view, we have simply said, and it's very much the modern thinking, simply look to the money.
Yeah.
The money gain. Simply look to the money gain. And I cry out that what is the money gain? It's manipulation of money. Are the problems that we are currently in, are the folly of bankers, of the greed of bankers and manipulators. There's no other fundamental change, and yet there's been a tremendous chaos brought about in the financial sector.
Left it to the bean counters.
That's it, absolutely. Whereas the correct thing, I very much believe, is that man, the maker, homo faber, should make things for the use of other people, himself and other people, sell it at a profit. It's a very foolish thing to try and sell something at a loss. You don't survive very much. But don't take in every consideration. Don't take the money gain as the prime judgment, which is it absolutely happens now. The prime judgment is on every situation. Very much the new government. I mean, they're enormously interested in the new rich and so on. The prime thing is, what's the money gain? We should all be considering what is the long-term issue.
That's right.
And I'm constantly crying out, let's take a long-term view. It doesn't matter a damn whether the profit's a little bit low. You don't want to be in loss for too long, but it doesn't matter about the profit. It doesn't matter who are the shareholders. They're in the institution. It doesn't matter at all.
Right.
The long-term issue is the thing.
So you'd been involved with Isagoni, who you obviously have a great regard for.
Great regard for him.
And jointly, you've achieved some astounding successes.
Yes. Well, it was wonderfully synergetic. I mean, he was older than 15 years older than I, but I learned so tremendously from him. Of course, his methods. He wasn't at all didactic. He wasn't interested in teaching. I'm interested in trying to explain things to younger people, and I'm very much concerned with working with Bath University and with the Small Peace Trust on doing engineering guides, if you like, one page, one item, in the most direct way of solving particular technical problems in engineering. And that's I do it every week with a nice representative from Bath University, and it will be published by this charitable trust. Now, my own affairs estate will be a charitable trust with the motivation of, or the direction of, apart from the heritage aspect of this important house. I want to concentrate on that. Also for engineering, design, education, because I deeply believe in the significance of engineering, as always will be, homo faber, and I deeply believe that our educational methods are not so direct now, and therefore anything that I can do in contribute, I have deep satisfaction. Now, Isigonis was not, he was very much a prima donna, as he should have, quite properly it should have been a prima donna, and one simply learns from him, from his works, if you examine the of his creations, one could learn from him. And I directly, being fortunate enough to be associated with him, learned a lot directly.
Isn't he very much like a lot of wonderful designers and wonderful inventors? They tend to be somewhat introvert.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
They can do the job.
Yes.
Well, we've done that.
Yes, absolutely.
And you, I think, are quite different. You want to tell people how you
exactly,
develop it.
And the logic
of it.
Is that
something new, Alex? Or is
no, I know you're absolutely right in that definition and that differentiation. No, I think that I'm driven by a desire to understand and to check if what I'm doing is reasonable. Therefore, if you go through that process, part of the process is to explain it.
Even if you only explain it to yourself?
Indeed, absolutely, if you don't explain it to yourself.
Once you've done that, you can explain it to someone else.
Yes, exactly.
That's right.
Yes.
So, with Isagoni, you produced the suspension, the mini and so forth. You were still, at that time, associated with the factory?
Yes. Now, we sold the factory at just about that period. I, as a young director of the factory, Spencer Moulton factory, could see that from a synergy point of view it was wrong size. And so I was instrumental in getting a buyout of our neighbouring and much bigger factory, Avon Rubber, which happened in just that time, 56. And that has been an enormously successful thing. I mean, it was a real merger, if you like, in which there was no strong ego of the Spencer Moulton thing, because I went off on my own separateness, Moulton Developments and the bicycle and so on, and therefore it was a proper takeover in which, as it was all very local, the Avon directors recognised the strength of the Bradford people, and coming forward, goodness knows how many years, the factory at the bottom of the garden here, over the fence here, is no longer a factory, but it's been transferred, the operation has been transferred to a greenfield site at Chippenham, and the personnel, the key personnel, are from Bradford. So there's it's an enormously successful tradition, continuity, because they're father-son. From there. And I'm interested, by the way, I'm very, very happy and very lucky to be a technical consultant to Avon after all those years. So the answer is we sold out sensibly for synergy, for the continuity of the rubber manufacturing business. And I myself started in the stables, which you know, doing this research for the British Motor Corporation, which was to be made, products to be made by Dunlop, because Avon was too small. Now that's interesting.
In part 2, we focus on the Moulton bicycle. But first, what got Alex interested in developing the bicycle?
The launch of the Mini was 59, and the impact of that on the world press, of course, was tremendous.
Over rough track to see how the new rubber suspension stands up to the shock. Tests that go on and on. These motoring correspondents took the new cars and drove them and saw for themselves how the clever suspension and the new engine position gave them a spacious car with such a wonderful ability to hold the road that they were a zippy joy to drive. These new cars are sensational. Some baby loaded, the most sensational car ever made here.
And we were all very buoyed up because we were taking part in the thing, and then that moved very sweetly onto the hydroelastic, onto the 1100, which was going to come out in 62, all being prepared. And I was buoyed up by having seen success, which one was swept along as part of it, in no way responsible. That was entirely Lord driving from the top, and Isigonis with his brilliance, and everybody there in Dunlop, tremendously Dunlop were wonderful people at Fort Dunlop, that one knew what success was like and what you do for success. You very, very fundamentally take every care, etc., etc. Like, of course, we did actually, if you think back, like we did the shadow factories in the war. I mean,
yes.
The same sort of attitude. It was a continuity of that attitude, a winning attitude, if you like. And so, therefore, it was with the petrol rationing, which you know, 56, the Suez crisis, we were all tending to use smaller cars because we were rationed with petrol. And I then simply, for the first time, tried a nice lightweight bicycle. And one of my friends from the Bristol aeroplane days had a Hitchins, and I bought this Hitchins, and I was absolutely overwhelmed by the things in the museum now, how wonderful it is. I mean, I had no idea what a lovely bicycle, like what a fine lightweight bicycle was. And I thought, my goodness me, what a fantastic thing. I couldn't imagine it. So it was moved to say, I'd like to improve this.
So you had this delightful experience of riding a hand-built,
yes,
beautifully crafted lightweight bicycle,
yes,
which must have been a tremendous change from your gas pipe special
absolutely,
Hercules.
Yes.
And that had a real sort of impact on you.
A profound effect. You see, I hadn't bicycled really, I think, since Cambridge days, nothing, and the very kid days, making a long journey on as a child, a kid. And so this was a revelation, and a revelation of joy. And the very important thing, you can't create anything out of hatred or disinterest. You must be driven by a joyful feeling. And I was also joyous by having seen how a technical success is achieved by the Mini and so on. And so I determined to do it in an analogous way. In other words, study fundamentals and then decide what to do. And the fundamentals that we've been often told, I rode got hold of a recumbent, F.H. Grubb.
Yes.
You remember that?
Kingston.
Was it? Could well be. That was called, really.
The
yes.
Kingston, yes.
And which I imagine was copied from the French prototype. And what I experienced with that, because I was questioning the riding position.
You got hold of one of those
and rode it. Immediately found the thing which is rather different to what people think of nowadays, the better acceleration by being able to get a purchase from your back.
Sure.
The other thing was that I immediately noticed the difficulty of holding the femur, the weight of the mass of this top piece of the leg, up, because I hadn't considered putting clips on or pads on. And that was a disadvantage. And the other disadvantage, which sounds funny today, one got splashed by lorries. And but above all, and I say this absolutely this deep truth up to today, that it was unstable. In other words, the natural instability or difficulty of balancing of the very low centre of gravity and the low inertia, of which the complete opposite is the high wheeler, of course,
yes,
where you could maintain, as you know better than anyone, you can gain stability at a tiny speed. And it was the deficiency of that really alarmed me. And coming across the years, because I've been very impressed by many people who made recumbent Moultons. I had a look at that, did a long study 2 years ago, working with some students in Bath University as an exercise, and I said, am I right in still disregarding the recumbent version, having done the rest of the bicycle? And I did this test 2 years ago, very simple test, which is with a well-adjusted young rider, in other words, the control feedback loop, if you like, between the eye and the hand, it was well established in this young man, not me, being old wouldn't be good at that. And we through the stable yard, there's an arch which you come up through, and he was to stand at the top set off at the top of the hill, run down freewheeling through the arch, archway. And when he was in flight, I threw a leaf into the flat surface of the archway, and the charge was to avoid it. Now, he couldn't take a prior aim because he was already in flight, as it were, and he didn't know where I was going to put the thing down. And it more than confirmed my belief that, in comparison, particularly with my bicycle, the Moulton bicycle, which is extremely dartable and controllable dartable, he was in no way able to make such a quick a change of direction, which is a fundamental thing in vehicle stability. So I confirmed 30, 40 years after that first experiment that I didn't want to go the recumbent way.
Yes.
So that's that. So that was disregarded. And then coming back to that early period of the late 50s, I looked at the rest of the thing, studied the rest of the thing, and said, I have no complaint about components. You see, everybody over the years had been developing components. That's right. And we, of course, in this country had a wonderful component industry, Williams cranks, and all the first, except for the derailleur, which I'm sure was of French origin, but you may have another point of view about the tri-velox and things, but by and large, everything of componentry of the bicycle had come from England. Is that a reasonable statement?
In general terms, right. Yes. Even the derailleur, there was a derailleur on the Whippet of, I think, 1896.
Was there really?
Yes. Two-speed, but it was a derailleur.
Was it really? Okay, but it's a general truth that our wonderful Midlands produced the infrastructure of cycle components. Right. And I had no complaints with that, the way they'd gone. They'd done well, they developed it well. They didn't say how bad a brake was, or how bad a saddle was, or whatever, or pedals or cranks or anything. But what struck me immediately, and having accepted the riding position, the classical riding position, may I call it classical, I said to myself, why are the wheels so big?
Yes.
And that was the... And look, I must have been moved by that. I certainly was moved by that, by the enormous importance of the size of the wheel on the Mini, on the whole arrangement and space occupation and architecture of the Mini. It was influenced tremendously by the tiny wheels, and they were tiny in those days. So I naturally had no fear in questioning that. And then working, of course, with Dunlop, where I was very closely associated with the suspension thing, and Dunlop in those days were wonderful. They were really enthusiastic about doing tests and so on. So all that work of the resistance, of rolling resistance and so on, was done with Dunlop, making new tires, making new molds and so on. And so it was the small wheel which was really the significant invention, high-pressure tire, and then naturally suspension, because I mean I just thought it was an unusual thing for any human-bearing vehicle not to have suspension. That's right. Yeah. So and then the open frame and so on. So those were the approach, was the fundamental approach. What I didn't like, I altered in the manner that came out in the first Moulton bicycle. So that was, if you like, the creative origin of the Moulton bicycle, in the form, by the way, of very good prototypes, because we had skills in our workshop for developing the suspension. We had this lovely workshop. And from that, by the way, right across the years, we're now talking whatever it is, 30, 40 years ago, I've maintained that the key help in engineering creation, is prototyping. The skilled men to translate an idea which is from the mind, delineated on paper by a drawing of some sort of sketch, into hardware for testing. That key thing I learnt in those days, I knew in those days, and I maintain that absolutely.
We're going right back to the hall carpenter, the man with the skill in his hands. You're absolutely right.
You're absolutely right.
I presume then that you tried to sell the idea because I don't think you wanted to be a manufacturer.
You couldn't be more right. Maybe just talk on that, because that's you remember that I had come from a manufacturing firm of rubber manufacturers. Had seen, if you like, the very much larger scale necessary for the manufacture of the suspensions, needing Dunlop, much larger firm, Dunlop Coventry that was. And I'd thought to myself that I would license. The natural thing to do is to license the Midland skills to manufacture this thing. Yes. I'm creating it. I want that. And I had who to go to. Well, now, I had through Gonis introductions to TI, Tube Investments, Birmingham. I had introductions to, and you know, the name I've actually forgotten for a moment, but he was one of the original directors of TI. And I remember I had a Lancia Aurelia car, and one of the models, which is now in my museum of delineating this new form, Isigonis took me to this guy in Edgbaston, and I had this Aurelia car, and I remember putting the model of this thing on the roof, because it was quite relatively low, we were looking at this thing, and this man said, look, don't go to us, TI Phillips, go to Raleigh, who in fact at that time, of course, a competitor, yeah, and go and see George Wilson, who was the chairman. And so I did. And whatever it was, whether I saw him, what it ended up with him coming here. He came down in a big Jaguar car with a stand. I said, bring with you a good standard bicycle. And we had John Woodburn, who was this great racing cyclist. He came, he was here with me, and he demonstrated the bicycle up and down, the Moulton bicycle, up and down one of these nice prototypes, up and down the hill from Staverton, which is quite near to Staverton. It was quite a steep hill. He went up and down that and up and down that. And George Wilson, comparing the two bicycles, sorry, he put the one out of the boot. He had this Mark 10 Jaguar with a great big boot, George Wilson. And he rode it about a bit. I don't think he struggled up the hill, but he just watched, obviously, John Woodburn going up and down. And there was no doubt that the Moulton bicycle was enormously comparable with this rally bicycle, a light tourer bicycle. And I remember him saying, sitting on the wall overlooking the river at Staverton, gosh, I want a fag after all this. So he took out a Woodbine. You know, he was of that generation. And I remember that very clearly. And it ended that message, but he said, look, this is very significant in history. Do you mind if I take back this prototype? I said, it's enormously confidential. I said, I'll keep it absolutely confidential, but I must discuss it with I've got a new man coming in, Leslie Roberts, who I'm getting in from Hoover. And I want just to discuss it in confidence with him. And that was the start, if you like, of 2 years of consideration. And that was enormously significant. And what happened in that 2 years? I was going up there to describe the thing and collaborating with them on altering the any changes to make it more suitable. And I remember one very, very important thing in that 2-year period where the thing was, as it were, on offer. I was in the boardroom at Notting Hill Raleigh with George Wilson, and I was outside in a corridor, possibly to get something, and I saw the sales manager with a great big man. I can't Hutchins or some such name as that. Great big man, Harrison, great big man. Dragging it with my prototype bicycle, because at that time we were thoroughly discussing it with the top people, sideways, with a great look of his face was all inflamed. And I looked at it, was he dragging the thing sideways in a very strange way? And I saw that he was trying to indicate that the thing was flexible, you know. Actually, enormously more rigid than anything he made. So it was my first introduction to somebody wanting to destroy the stupid thing, you know, to hate it, you know. There was hatred in it. And so that was a negative thing. And then I was then taken out. There's another thing. I was then taken out by Harrison and Davis, I think it was. By that time, the companies were coming together. TI and Raleigh were coming together in the amalgamation. And these are the two sales bosses. I was taken out to dinner. And I remember one of them saying over the bar, what do you want him to do, Alex Moulton? And I said, I want to license you to make this thing, make and sell this thing. You know, amazed. They thought that I was up to some trick to want to try and take their jobs or take over something. You know, it was an amazing attitude. You know, it was a corporate attitude. Here, this man from outside, who's familiar with the boss, Wilson, hasn't come up through the ordinary way, with this amazing thing, which is rather well made. I mean, there's no question of them actually then, because it's a beautiful prototype, some of which you've seen in the museum. What's he up to? And here was I, was simply wanting to do what I said to license the thing.
Yes.
And so I saw then, I was beginning then, my naivety was again a little bit loosening, and I realized it was unlikely that it was going to do anything. And then, of course, they were thoroughly preoccupied with the takeover situation, the jostling of the position between who was going to be boss. Yeah. And that was a takeover, of course, by TI, as you know. And actually, George Wilson did succeed, I think, in becoming, although he was taken over, did succeed in becoming the boss for a while. But properly they were concerned with that, and that my project was put to one side. And it was all another very important thing to record is that the marketeers, not only the inside people of Raleigh and of TI, but also very big dealers were brought in. They said, unmarketable, you can't sell it at all, and it's absolutely, oh no, don't do anything like this, no, 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 no. So there was an enormously typical negative reaction of a corporation. Commonly
known as the RC factor, resistance to change.
Yes, absolutely. And also the NIH, not invented here factor as well.
Oh yes,
as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what I did in 60, I don't know quite what it was, so 60 or 61, I did, which I often do, and I'm going to do it a little bit later on in our discussion about the present bicycle, check, am I right in my conviction? Is the thing unmarketable? Or on the contrary, is it marketable? So I did a tiny market survey done in air, the name of a very nice shop in Irvine. I'm groping for anyway, it's on the west coast in Ayrshire. There's quite an important little town right on the coast there, and a shop which is a good bicycle shop, and I got them through a youngish market survey company in London. I said, I can't afford any significant money, but do an intelligent thing to take it far away. And David Duffield, by the way, would know the name of that shop of that man who's died a few years ago. Do this market survey in that shop, far away. Nobody would have heard of a Moulton or anything. I mean, even if they anything like that. And this guy, in the small market survey of operation, simply set up 2 prototype bicycles, which we had, these beautiful prototypes, one in the shop, standing up there, and one just standing by. And they, to ask the customer coming in to do an ordinary thing, like buying a torch battery, say, oh, by the way, this bicycle, would you ever consider buying it? The price of it would be 20% more than that very minimum one, which in those days was £28, something of that sort. And if there's a positive remark, a positive interest, then take a test ride round with the other one. And there was an overwhelming affirmation that it was marketable. So enormous. I mean, it was over 50% people said yes. At that price, it was a little bit more than the cheapest. We would buy it.
But you were getting more for your money because you were getting suspension
and carrying capacity, universal, all those
unisex
features.
Design,
yes,
the whole
yes,
thing.
Exactly. So that was a tremendously important vindication that don't take the ordinary, don't take the expert's point of view, actually go to the customer, but you've got to do it very professionally, which this man did, you see. And don't do it for me, because I would be enthusiastic about it. Right. And I might be persuasive, but this deadpan little man that did the thing so well. So that convinced me. So then I decided to do it myself.
Tom Northey's #1 rule: never overlook the obvious.
Quite.
You
Yes.
went to the people
Yes.
indirectly.
That's it.
And asked them the question
Exactly.
without any bias at all.
That's it, exactly.
And you got the right answer.
Got the right answer.
So then that must have fired your enthusiasm
It did.
again. And
It
what,
did.
what did you do?
Right, I then said, right, I'm going to make myself. So the first thing, really, good back to fundamentals, build a factory. So on our estate, just up there. So I built this factory. It started to be on what's called the donkey field, because that's where we used to have a donkey.
Yes.
And wretched creature, I was terrified I was a child. I didn't, and it was nice. We have a donkey shed there. It's a very nice stone building, which has now an engine inside it. And so this thing was being built. Then the factory was being built, 5,000 square feet. And I mean, there seemed to be, I had no hesitation. I knew that was the right thing to do it oneself. And at that time, I don't know how dear David Duffield entered my life. I can't remember. He must tell you how it happened. He must have known something about it or heard something, whatever it was. We became, as we remain absolutely to this very day, very great friends. And he was a brilliant, marvellous man. I mean, a proper cyclist,
yes,
deep, and a very extrovert, nice, open-minded, open man. And he was my marketing man. He'd had an experience. He was quite young, but had an experience in I think Philips at that time. I think he was in Philips to start with, and he's had a whole life in the cycle world. And he's deep. I have very much consult him now by his deep knowledge of everything. And he did how neatly the thing was marketed in the sense of the advertising. He introduced his tiny little silhouette. And all that very good promotion that went on at that time. And we spent quite a bit of money on it, and then a major launch at the 1962 Earl's Court.
That's right.
A very big stand. And we were inundated. And I remember the Macmillan came, and the Prime Minister, and the Birmingham were with us, you know. That was wonderful because we were associated with the success of the BMC car just before, and very much going on. The 1100 was coming out then, and yes, more innovation of the hydroelectric suspension and so on. But we were carried along by this wonderful support from the Midlands, you know. And the most amazing thing, which is the most unlikely thing you could imagine, that we were getting on the stand overwhelmed. It was a big stand. We were getting absolutely overwhelmed by people clawing at us. We want to buy, and foreign people as well, we want to buy this thing. And our little factory wasn't made, it was just being built. Right. And I remember ordering from the show, Earl's Court, double the size, and so the 5,000 square foot factory was being extended, instructed to be extended to 10,000. And this thing you won't believe, but it's true. That Sidney Wheeler, who was the secretary and director of the Austin Motor Company, and very close to, obviously, to the board, Len Lord and George Harriman, telephoned down to me on the stand and said, "Don't hesitate to take orders. We'll make it for you." That's an amazing thing. The British Motor Corporation offering to make it for me if I was inundated with orders. And then just touching on one very relevant point, that this is dear David Duffield's insisted with my enormous support. We must prove the principle by sporting things. So then that was that famous race that he fixed up at the Butts at Coventry, yes, with the Leicester team versus the Coventry team. And I think Mick Ives was on that thing. Wasn't that right? Yeah. And it was a wonderful thing that we had made pursuit bikes, and they just absolutely soar off. Whichever team was on with our bicycles, it just on the pursuit just won. So we vindicated that as a racing machine it was very significant. And then the other thing was we did this a ridiculous thing that attempted to do a road record in the middle of winter, which is a damn fool thing to have to do. But
yes, especially in out and back.
That's right. This was actually Cardiff to London record, so it was a downwind.
Yes.
Well, yes, it was downwind run. And it was John Woodburn, of course, did it. And I remember vividly, because if you know that if you're following a road record attempt in a car, you've got to move very fast, and you remember that you've got the regulations are that you've got to distance, and then if you pass, you've got to be tremendously part of that. And I was with I was in an S3 Bentley, I think that was at the time, and I remember I was moved immensely by seeing it was before the bridge, obviously, went round to Gloucester. I was tremendously moved by the progress of this racing cyclist on a long road. I mean, it was an amazing progression, if you like. And then to get it to Marble Arch, I had to leave the car, whatever it was, and hurry to the Marble Arch to meet him. You know, and so they went out and had supper together. So that was a memorable thing. The Woodburn breaking this 62, I think, I can't remember, 62 or 64, to make a very radical innovation and presume to offer it right across the board to the public. You must jolly well prove that you're right. And in no way, that's where, of course, all the things that came later in the manner of were completely opposite to my desire to make a totally better bicycle. They just were shopping bicycles and so on. So
that's right.
That was the demonstration I've done, and I've done, that's why in later years we did speed records and so on, the streamline thing in America and so on. So all the time I try and we're not allowed to, very early on, it was quite understandable, we weren't allowed to compete in racing, because it was very apparent that from the experience on the butts, and indeed on some small road racing, that you can enjoy with a small wheel tighter drafting, and you can accelerate better, and it's disturbing for the rest of the riders in a peloton to have this funny little thing rushing through. So that's understandable. Therefore you simply say, forget that, let's go for a record. If you're faster, beat us.
The rest of the Moulton story has been very well covered by that well-known book, the Moulton Bicycle book, and your business was perhaps a bit too successful for you.
Yes.
And you needed to look for someone else to take it over.
No, that's it's a kind inference, but it is not so. The actual fact was that Raleigh were furious.
Oh, I can understand that.
Raleigh were furious, and do remember Raleigh was TI, and Plowden, Lord Plowden, was the chairman of TI, and therefore the chairman of Raleigh, and he used to say to his Raleigh members round the board, I suppose Leslie Roberts, what's all this thing? I opened the newspaper. What's all this thing about Moulton? And apparently, I'd forgotten, maybe in our records, that in the Daily Express there was more coverage of some Moulton thing than on the launch of Ford Cortina. I mean, the publicity of this damn thing, which was ridiculous, if you like, but there it was, and David Duffield was very much strongly competent in his charisma in getting these promotion thing. And so in the end, I suppose, they remember they were taken over by Raleigh, and this is, remember that the chairman was T.I., Lord Plowden. I suppose Leslie Roberts, and I suppose they were really incited by this thing. So they said to themselves, we'll show our chairman that we were quite right in turning it down. And so I think they must have been working for some long time on this thing, the RSW 16. And they launched that thing in whatever year it was, 65, I think, with a tremendous publicity. They copied everything. It was very extraordinary the way they did it. I mean, they copied everything the way David Duffield had put the bicycle going about on Rep's car on the roof, standing up in the vertical way, whereas at that time they turned them upside down, ordinary bicycles. So you could ride along seeing a Moulton bicycle or there were mini trucks or little minis that way up. And so they did the same thing. So all the time Raleigh was simply in the manner of the Moulton. And of course the publicity was enormous, the advertising was enormous, and it was said that they spent £250,000 on the whole promotion of the thing. And the public and the dealers were thankful. They said, "Oh, how wonderful! We've got a proper firm making the things." Just the same, Moulton and Raleigh, just say, except the Raleigh was a little bit cheaper and much better finished, particularly than the ones made by BMC at Kirby in Lancashire, Liverpool, where the quality wasn't very good. So it was inevitable that we would suffer from the market, having been lured by the Moulton into this sensible new form of bicycle, in this other one made Raleigh. Here's Raleigh. And it had one or two features which were better. It was a lower step-over height, and which women found on our stand machine was maybe a little bit high. And so our market was being attacked. And I, therefore, was sensible, and I haven't been sensible many times in my commercial life, but I mean, I certainly was sensible. I said, "Hey ho, Alex, don't fight this lot. Can do a conciliation if possible. Don't fight them, because they're 10 times, 100 times bigger, and they'll burn you out." And so I was talking to Leslie Roberts, because Leslie Roberts was wanting the Moulton thing all the time, and we, in the end, sold. It was a distress sale, really. It was no. I mean, I covered losses because we were getting into a loss situation, and this is the danger. You see, if you're in a big way, if you tip into a loss situation, it's big money. And remember, it was my money in it. I hadn't got any. I've never had any external fund in any of my enterprises. Therefore, now, with prudence, I keep small.
Yes.
So if bad things happen, and one can go through bad periods, you simply say, well, provided the projections of what you're going to do are all right, see it out. But if you're in a big way, and you're a single individual, a small money of single individual, hey ho, you could get them in. There could be bankruptcy in the end, and that's all at the end of the thing. So I was sensible in conciliating to Raleigh, and we were with an enormous seller. They came down here, and the photographs, Raleigh, Moulton. We go together with this designer Moulton, with the Raleigh Moulton, and they were celebrating that. There were photographs on the terrace here, and so. And I did rather say that, look, Leslie Roberts, don't stand as if you own the house. Because you don't. You know what I mean?
You've only bought the bicycle.
That's right. So we've now that therefore moved. So it was we moved to having stopped bicycle manufacture, and Raleigh went on with it. Now in their bosoms, I don't think they had really any intention of going on with the thing. They had the intention of doing, they certainly had the intention of this collaboration with me, and they funded a consultancy, and they funded a very important thing, which was a little research program, which I led entirely, and we did some very, very fundamental research. We've got them all, which are all dossiered away, of the power required to drive the bicycle and so on. All those fundamental things that I did in the early 70s, which I was confirming fundamental truths, which I wanted to be, was I right in certain things? And these deep truths, of course, have gone into, I've kept them, I published them at the Royal Institution Discourse in 1973. And it was a valuable period, but they had no intention of doing a combined thing at all. And then they had their own history and so on.
After the tie-up with Raleigh and your disappointment that they'd let it die, right. I suppose, and I'm asking the question, could you have actually retired and sat on the front lawn and just enjoyed looking at the world? But you didn't. You'd got this drive that you wanted an even better bicycle than the Moulton.
Absolutely, sir. The answer is I could have done, indeed. Look, I've never, let's make a point, I own a lovely property which I've done conserved over the years and so on, but I'm not a wealthy person, but I certainly could have done what you say. But leaving that quite apart, I'm absolutely, I shall be driven to my dying days to pursue a number of things, which I'm quite consistent of, which is pursuing the improvement of the bicycle, and the spin-off, which I've touched on before, of engineering education, because I'm interested in the broader sense of that, but on the bicycle. I thought 83, which however many years after the having sold out to Raleigh. In the meantime, do remember that I'd enjoyed, and they had funded, if you like, this basic research, which gave me confidence that what my principal theme was quite correct. And with small wheels, etc., high pressure tires, and therefore I thought, well, I'll have another go, but I'll do it again entirely myself. But I shall do it in such a small way I shan't annoy anybody. I shan't invoke or any. Nobody cares a damn what I do now, and therefore I started this thing in, as you know, in '83, the so-called AM series. Pursuing exactly what you say, a desire to make a further improvement in my theme. That all the time, in doing a new innovation, one does it as best one can to start with. Then you say to yourself, can I do it more cost effectively? And I invented then, which is worth looking at, the hairpin tubes. The tubes aren't cod's mouths, which is so expensive, a beautiful way of doing it for joining. They're bent round, and the extra length is just lost at the centre pin. So it's relatively very low cost method of making it. And so, having made that, we took it. David again was David Duffield. Again appears many times this tale. We took it to Raleigh to see whether I'm talking about 1988. Would you like to make this thing under license, you see? And the different people there. No, thank you very much. No, there were different people, but we were being polite. Yeah. And then we took it to America. And there was a Japanese firm that we were, it was interested that our importers, Angle Lake, thought might be interested in this thing, and they were very too difficult to deal with it, so the answer, it didn't happen. And again, licensing again, you see. Yes. Low cost. So I decided then that is anybody in England, and so we approached, we had the Dick Pashley down, and he said yes, if his boys were interested, the answer was yes. So that was the start of the ATB, all-terrain bicycle, which is what we were starting with, being degraded a bit in tubing, but perfectly all right, to the APB. And it's been a very nice running thing, which goes on forever, we hope, with further improvements, under license from our tools at Pashley.
Without going too deeply into the two types of bicycles that you've made, Alex, which are beautifully covered in Tony Hadley's two books, and it must be quite unusual for a single item like a one make of bicycle to have a book written about it, but two books is even better. Let's talk about your spare time. I mean, do you have time for hobbies?
Still very interested in the analogue of cycling, which is kayaking. In other words, that, and I'm still doing. I've got lots of them because they're relatively inexpensive things. And it's for instance, only a fortnight ago, I was paddling a klepper canoe off Tockington, off Plockton in the west of Scotland, Plockton. And so that's certainly so. Then the estate here that I've got, we have a little sporting shoot on it. That, which I really do from a social point of view. It's very nice social entertaining, but the prime thing is that it enables one to constantly conserve it, replant the wood, and generally look after the place. And that's the interest of having an estate. You want possibly a recreational activity in order that you are actively conserving it. So those two things are very active. And apart from that, no, I mean, I read in the evenings very much, but the recreational thing, as I say, walking on the estate and kayaking, apart from bicycling.
Yes. You haven't talked about photography, but you're obviously interested in photography because you've got quite a large number of cameras. Yes, the whole place is festooned with photographs. Some of yours, obviously, and some aren't.
Exactly. I am fitting up, for one's old age, as it were, a dark room down on this ground floor, and so I shall practice developing and printing. My favourite thing, which is the little Minox size, which I find sort of attractive and rather analogous to the Moulton bicycle. It's a unique solution, the Minox, sub-miniature thing, and I admire it very much and use them.
Yeah. So you said early on that the bicycle meant freedom to you, the freedom machine, which is travel.
Yeah.
Have you travelled a lot? Do you like to travel?
No, I would say I have travelled, obviously. I've been to Africa and so on, and to America and so on. But I'm not driven at all, really, by travelling for the sake of. I always travel for a particular purpose, which is generally connected with one's interest. The interest, I mean, obviously a bicycle, my business, would take me to foreign places, but I'm not primarily a traveller. I'm much happier on knowing a piece of local country more and more in detail. We're very fortunate, I'm very fortunate to be born and live in England. In
that limited amount of travel that you've experienced, are there any particular modes of travel that you like or dislike? I mean, do you dislike flying, or do you
my greatest ambition, which will probably never be realised, is always, without any guilt, to travel first class on an aeroplane. I think the necessary travel of aeroplanes is enormously uncomfortable. How
is your daily timetable set up?
Routine, very straightforward and very, very rigid. I wake, alarm clock, 6:30, put on the radio 3, get up, go down, open the house up, make tea, go back to my room, working room, which is beside my bedroom, the oak room, where I do my work. And I have at least 2 hours of absolutely uninterrupted the best state of mind of the work that I want to do, drawing, whatever it is. So that's that. Then after breakfast, the executive thing of telephoning, in other words, up or down telephoning, then walking through the garden, and then going down to the factory and spending a little time there, and always looking at helping, working, and taking interest in the people and reacting with them, and then. I come back for a light lunch, and then there's always, very often there are people coming, so that. And then afternoon, I always like to try, if I can, I haven't done it today, to have a 10-minute snooze. I think it's very important, that recreationally. Then something more in the afternoon. And then evening, very rigorously operated by the news programs, and if there's a concert. And then normally bed, but it's easy dinner, self-help dinner thing, 10:30 to 11, that sort of time. So that's the day, which I run, that sequence I run entirely. I think it's very, very important to have that sequence, particularly that first 2 hours.
Yes. Are you a hard taskmaster?
Probably. But
do you think you could have produced what you've produced without being so?
No.
No, that's right. And are you able to suffer fools gladly?
Not for very long.
Well, you've suffered with me for most of the afternoon.
You haven't been absolutely. You've been a delightful conversationalist. Let's put it that way.
Looking back over your 50 years or so experience of British industry, how do you really see it today? And is there a way forward, or are we going to be a nation of bean counters and breakfast?
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. And the great hope is for encouraging startups, because there are still young people about who are springing up all the time, want to make things, and we very much encourage work experience, our own little shop. There's one man that I would enormously admire, David McMurtry, who set up his Renishaw metrology business. That's an example of everything that is excellent in a privately owned business. So it can be done, but the fear of the opposite is very great.
Looking back over your life, what's been the most satisfying thing that you've done?
In retrospect, the original Moulton bicycle.
Yes.
Joined with the thing which has gone out of print, which is the hydroelastic interconnector suspension, which is tremendously necessary for small cars, and everybody's abandoned it. But certainly those two things, the hydroelastic suspension, but primarily the Moulton, first generation Moulton bicycle.
Now, your new series machine, which I personally have said is that far ahead of the AM, that the AM was of the Moulton.
Yeah.
Do you see that as the end, or
No, certainly not there. Very much so, very actively have been started a year or so ago on further evolution of it.
Yeah.
Always in, as I say, the second phase is after an innovation, you do a lower cost version. And that's very much in my mind.
Yeah. Are there any regrets in your life?
I suppose that, yes, I suppose that I haven't made a great fortune out of these things. I do regret that a bit, but I don't think I'm the right sort of person to have done it.
What would you have done with a fortune?
Nothing at all.
Well, I've had a fascinating afternoon. It's been a delight to meet you again and to find out even more about you. I'm sure that there's another hour's conversation that we could have. I would sincerely not only thank you for the conversation this afternoon, but really and sincerely thank you for your contribution to cycling and cycle history. It's meant a great deal to a great deal of many people, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. And I do thank you for that.
Well, I value very much those sentiments. I deeply appreciate that. Deeply appreciate it indeed. And I've enjoyed this afternoon talking with you very much.